Well, today I'm going to think about colonialism and I guess subject of personal restraint. Um, I think that the broad approach to colonialism by imperial powers has tended to be, well, there's a transgression that precedes the explanation, or it precedes its justification. I think that the justifications for these things are always sort of post facto. Right now, there's well, for example, today I'm going to go, I guess, march or do some action in support of Palestinian liberation. The situation there it's pretty appalling, and it's just there's the drastic and the horrible stuff happening, and that's what can you do? Well, you can say, don't do this. Stop what you're doing. Try to act right. That's what you can do. It's so upsetting and sad, and in the end, well, the approximation that is the local approximation of those events. The thing that is proximally similar is the genocidal campaigns against Native Americans. Where I live, that's the similar. That's the antecedent and the comparable historical phenomenon. So you look at that, and the objective comes after the action. And I think the action comes because we can. I think that's the ultimate justification every time. It's because this is possible. I mean, a lighter and less horrible comparison is maybe the colonization and destruction of the internet by big companies. I've been around a long time, can remember when the internet was good, as I like to pretend to say. So I like to say, and sometimes pretend to believe. But the internet was colonized and taken over by Facebook and Google and other social media companies, and that's what the internet is now. It didn't used to be. It used to be, free. I think that's a fair way of saying it. It was a free place that became colonized. And for those of us at the time, this was an important frontier because there's not a lot of horizons in post-industrial Midwestern wasteland. Where can you go? If you have nowhere to go and there's no better life, you look for that place where you can pioneer your own way, and the internet was that place for a lot of people. I've argued elsewhere that that's almost the justification, or obviously you need no justification for having children, but that is an argument for why. Well, not an argument, but it's an aspect of the desire for having children, because you say my own life is curtailed significantly, but in the future my kid's life might be better. So you're pioneering and trying to colonize the future. You're trying to find a frontier in time, and you can't colonize it yourself. You won't survive, but maybe your genes will. Maybe your essential makeup can persist into the future, and that's the frontier you can colonize by having children. But even that is, that's being foreclosed. And then you look at what is gained by the act of colonialism, and you think about, in North America, think about genocidal campaigns of Indian removal, the various wars that we've constantly been having. I mean, most of the wars the United States have had against native populations of subjugation, eradication, genocide, extermination. Those are the wars the United States has fought most. And when you think about why, my position is that it's because they could. It's because, well, no one can stop us. And if nobody can stop you, then why show restraint? Why have restraint? I don't think you could go to North Dakota and say, well, slaughtering all the Plains Indians was the right thing to do. That way we can have, a horrible wasteland of what? Strip malls and abandoned shopping centers on a highway. I just don't see how what we have now justifies murdering people. And this is, I guess, the essence of the imperialist drive, and the reason that it's so distasteful. If a crime happens, if somebody does something to you, they try to. Well, if you're robbed, for example, I can speak to this. I've been robbed sometimes. Now, my business has been robbed. I'm too intimidating to rob myself. But so somebody comes to take from you, and why do they do this? Well, it comes out of desperation and want. These are people out of necessity. They're going to come after what you have and take it because they don't have resources. It's out of desperation. And so these are easier things to forgive. Maybe there's transgression. Serious transgression. Maybe violence is involved. Maybe they'll really hurt somebody. But at the same time, the justification is, I don't know what to do. I have no capacity to survive or to fuel my substance abuse problem. There's a lot of injury that precedes this, but it creates a desperation, and those desperate people do these things. What you see in the colonial experience is really not that. It's these people, and who's going to stop me? Who's going to stop me? I'll just do what I want. They can't stop me. If not me, then someone else, right? That you hear a lot of that. If not me, then someone else, and that is the most facile of all defenses. It's again a post facto justification for doing these transgressions, and the transgression is it's based on just being able to do it. Now, I don't know if this is innate to mammals, people, all organisms, but because I assume this is present in the bacteria and in the protozoa, the diatoms will overextend and do whatever they can. You go here where I live, you go into the suburbs, and there's just so much wanton consumption. It's overwhelming and sort of soul crushing if you, like me, don't see overconsumption as a virtue, but rather it's a sin. And this is I think this is restated by most religions over and over, that there's self-restraint. You have to stop yourself from doing everything that you can do. I think that goes back to dawns of civilization. This is something, if not outright described by Gilgamesh, it's at least approached as a subject, that we have all this power and capacity to command everything, because Gilgamesh is a king. He's half a god and half a man, right? He's understood civilization, but he has the power of life and death. He can kill at will. And so he does too much, and that creates this scenario where destruction befalls him. And the parable of the destruction befalling you for transgressing is, well, I guess the great tragedy is that it's just not true. That you can overdo everything and pay no consequence, except that it's a shock to your conscience that what you've done is too punitive and hurtful to you. Can you live with the terrible things you've done because you were able to do them? Because this transgression couldn't be prevented, because no one would stop you or could. What do? You conquer people, eliminate them, and take everything of theirs. You do this because no one has the capacity to stop you. Maybe somebody can come and say, "Don't do this," and try to speak to your conscience, try to spark some type of. It's distracting to me that there's the Windows background. I don't want that. Go away. I can't have the real window. This is just where my phone sits. But you can't come and say, "Don't do this," and be assured that somebody's going to obey you, or look inside themselves and say, "No, you know what? You're right. I've gone too far. This is wrong. I should care about other people and do the right thing." You'll suffer and die horribly if your hope is to persuade people to act right. So you have to train people to act right from birth, effectively. And I think that's in some respects the project of religions generally. That's why restraint is baked into them. That's why there's always like a palette of sins and transgressions that are all based around overstepping or overflowing the banks of an established propriety. So eating too much or consuming too much or being greedy or killing people or doing violence too much. All of these things lead to, well, what? I mean, in a vacuum, without the restraint of, and this is why people say, well, how do you know what's right and wrong without religion? Well, because when you've hurt somebody. It's obvious. It's just that, does everybody actually have a conscience that's developed? And I'd say that in my culture, contemporary North America, religion serves as a post facto justification more often than it serves as the warning against. More people are willing to go and be like Air Force pilots and do bombing because their church will justify it, rather than a church saying, you shouldn't kill people. You just shouldn't. It's wrong to kill people. It's wrong to drop bombs on them from out of the sky. Somehow that's controversial and alienating in the religious environment. And to me, the religion has completely failed if it's not saying don't drop bombs on people. Because there's a transgression. Now, on the other side of that, there's of course the people who act out of desperation, who do what they can, who do things not because they can, but because they must, because there's nothing else for them to do, or at least they see no viable alternative. And on an individual basis, these things are muddled, right? You might see Israeli soldiers who are going to say, well, it's this or I will die. And you might find Palestinian people who say, well, I'll kill them all because I can. I think that the broader strokes, Palestinian people, Little Bighorn, these things are done more out of desperation and the scouring of Gaza and the Indian Removal Act or the Trail of Tears. These things are accomplished because you can. And one is always going to carry more moral weight and, I guess, emotional validity. You're going to look at it and say, well, this is terrible. Why would you do this? So you could build a mall that would be abandoned in 20 years? And just nothing, just for nothing. These people were massacred, displaced. Their language is destroyed. Everything about them is gone. And why? For really a paltry payout. But that payout is only used as a justification after the fact, because the real justification is because we can. It's that force of will that carries you forward. The purpose then of religion, in a lot of ways, I think, should be to create a sense of restraint and to set expected boundaries on what people are trying to, on the attainability of, or the limits of what your will should accomplish. It's not the limits of what your will can accomplish, because it's clear that if you're able to do it, and maybe this goes to every organism, as I said, maybe no organism can successfully moderate itself, and maybe that is what is potentially distinct about people. Maybe we can come to a place where we can build the solid state economy. We can stop having unlimited growth on a finite world. We can stop the coercive efforts of making everybody serve the interests of a ruling class and of the wealthy. And maybe, my take is always that the present ruling class is based on wealth, but it's not necessary that. But there's other ruling classes that could be, and I don't think any of them are justified, right? If it's based on your last name or birth or whatever, your quality as a warrior, whatever justification puts you in the ruling class, again, is always this post facto justification. Once you've managed to subjugate other people, you get into ethnic cleansing, you get into enslavement, you get into wage slavery, you get into all these debt peonage. You create this scenario where you're dominating other people, and the justification comes after the domination. And then when you're in that domination, when you're subject to that ruling class's control, what do you have? You have, well, you can do what I do here and try to espouse a moral high ground, try to develop a moral philosophy to, if not counter these things, then to just be a voice against them, to be somebody who's saying, you shouldn't do terrible shit for your own advantage. You shouldn't. You should be nice to people. It's really that easy. And this is, I don't know that a lot of spiritual leaders would argue otherwise, but I've seen it argued otherwise by spiritual leaders in my country, which is why I kind of don't go to church. My mother's church, I feel, is a place where they have a fascination, or it's almost like a warrior cult, where there's a veneration of the soldier. I just don't think you should venerate soldiers. I think, especially in a volunteer army, I just don't think there's justification for serving the American military. Except, who does it? There's people who do these things because they can, and it gives them an authority over others. And there's people who, out of desperation, join up because they have nothing better to do. I mean, they have no options. It's the only form of employment they can find, or it's the only means they have of having, medical treatment or access to education. So you can coerce people into doing the work of your imperialism, but it's the people you don't have to coerce that I think there has to be a rectification. You have to look at these people and understand, is there something innate to them, or is it innate to us as a species? Is it simply an effect of the creation and reinforcement of hierarchies. Does the creation of the hierarchy create its imposition so that it's always going to be perpetuated, because once you're in charge, you can justify your being in charge through the subjugation of other people. You know, if you're a wealthy person in the ruling class, you can say, well, I have all this money and I get to control everything because I have this money. And you don't because you're less than me. Now, that less than me, I've seen internalized a lot. I'm at a place in time and age where a lot of my friends, our kids are aging out and moving on and going to college and leading their own lives. And it shakes you, because your justification for a lot of maybe the subjugation that you'll endure as a person is, well, I mean, this dude's going to make me eat a mile of shit at my stupid job that I hate, but I have to because, kid needs hospitalization. What if something bad happens? What if she needs braces? I gotta, I'll suffer through this nonsense because I have a kid and I'm bound. My kid grows up and then I find myself unwilling to eat a mile of shit, and I'm very willing to just walk away from a job the very moment that it doesn't suit me. And it creates sort of a vacuum of purpose, so that what do I do now becomes a more open question. What will I do now? I have a friend who's going to go be a library nun. I have other friends that are losing their minds, trying to change their career paths. I've been all over the place in this respect. Heck, I'm doing this thing. And one of the things that I hear a lot of is, well, I wish I had done this differently. It's not one of the things, it's the main thing. I hear this a lot. And there's a lot of regret that's baked in. Why did I leave my mean husband when I could have just sucked it up? Why did I study something useless in college? Why didn't I just learn to program the computer 20 years ago? And I think this second guessing and doubt of oneself not only is it erosive to the soul and hurtful, like you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't. It's fun to think about because you can imagine different worlds and different universes where you did these other things. There's those multiversal theorists that I don't personally find persuasive. But one thing that it does, it is a balm to those kinds of feelings, because you could say, well, what if there are all these universes? What if there's a universe where every single thing I might have done is the thing I did? Where, the universe in which I married the girl I went to homecoming with, or the universe in which I only make out with other dudes. Like, those are if you can imagine that those all actually exist, then it is a balm to the sense of regret that's baked into the hierarchy that we have, where you're always going to be retroactively doubting yourself because, I didn't develop those things, and my past self was stupid and bad. You look with shame and contempt on your old self because it didn't get you to where you need to be today, but you could have. And now, my position is that's that form of doubt and self-negation, where you're just going to say, I'm not really a person, I'm just an instrument for the hierarchy that I have to participate in, that I have to participate in because I'm coerced into it. If only I could have been more useful to it based on, future knowledge. And that's, you're right. What are you saying? You're saying, I'm not even a person. I exist solely to exist in this hierarchy, and if only I could shape myself to be more useful to it. And I have all these regrets. Well, that's, fuck that. Don't ever hold yourself responsible for your position. Don't, because your position is what you can make out of the world that is given to you, or that's increasingly the scrap of land that you're able to live on as it's being pulled out from under you. As the world itself is consumed by the people that are its masters, those of us who are master of nothing, who really only have ourselves, all we can do is have this regret for why am I not in this position? And that's, well, right, you're playing into that same game. You're just imagining yourself as the authority rather than, and increasingly not as the subject, but as the displaced refugee. So you're a refugee from the middle class. It's been colonized and you have nowhere to go. And so you have to struggle and find your own place. And the whole time you're a refugee. The place you're supposed to be in, say, the middle class, or, in comfort, to have something instead of nothing. That place that you're meant to be, and that you're born to, and that your existence is, predicated upon. Your parents were in that situation. I mean, I'm from the 70s. My folks were doing fine. And they expected for their kids to do fine, and their kids do adequately. Because what we have is the scraps of what was colonized out from under us. In my position, the middle class. If you're a Palestinian, then the entirety of occupied Palestine. Maybe I'll just be a dick that way and call it that. Or if you're a native person, the whole North America, outside of whatever reservation concession you're allowed, and that's increasingly these demands are pushing you out, and then all you can do is have this mournful sense of self-doubt, where you're blaming yourself for what has been done to you. And the North American hierarchy really likes to put the screws to you and say you should have been some dumbass STEM lord. I'll die on the hill that engineers and business people are not clever because they go into debt to learn job skills. I mean, that's your job should teach you that. You shouldn't have to pay to be put into competition with other people, and I have little respect for that. Plus, it's just math. It's not hard to learn. There, I tried to be mean. I don't know. But even people in those situations, you find them consumed by regret. I should have done this or that. I should have gone to medical. Everything is always like filling you with this sense of doubt, but that uncertainty is there to reinforce the situation of the ruling class, who is going to tell you, well, the justification of my authority is your inadequacy. And that's palatable because if they just came and said, well, the justification for my authority is that I'm better than you, that's not something that people will tolerate hearing on a larger scale. Some people might, and they might go for it, but at the same time, this is, again, this post facto justification. It comes after what's being done, and so there's a rationalization where they say, well, it's because I did all these things that you didn't do. And examine what I've done, and this demonstrates my superiority. I guess in my thoughts, I think about the oligarchs of today, but in every hierarchy, right? There's hierarchies within the hierarchy, and I was thinking about. I guess I had a dream where I met a famous person on an airplane, and my question to him, I don't know who this famous person was, but it was in a dream, and I said, is it hard to be famous? And he indicated that it was. And I guess that's maybe where I'm coming to this place of talking about self-restraint, about restraint, because the last president is about to face consequences, which, again, I find to be wholly surprising. I never imagined that he would face consequences for anything. And it's clear that he didn't either. And at this point, I do have, I have a sense of pity for that guy. Because he was so thoroughly, once it's clear that his utility to Republicans was over, they're just going to leave him out to dry. And that's, you can, maybe you'll see that defeat on him, that he knows that the people that used it, maybe he'll know that he was used up by them. But at the same time, there's the whole business of the recording where he was, when you're a star, they'll let you do it. Well, that's in my dream where I talk to an undisclosed or unknown famous person, if you're a star, they let you do it. That's how, if you can't restrain yourself, nobody around you will, if it seems, well, nobody around you will, until you've transgressed too far, at which point, then it comes to violence. So this moderation that you hear reiterated by religions, which I tend to repudiate, because moderation always, it's such a tepid value. It doesn't seem to have any kind of meaning. But you look at self-indulgence and self-denial, and there's a sense that there's a middle road of just being the self. Maybe I'll come back to that, but what I'm really wanting to talk about is this transgression. Because you're a star, they let you do it. You can see how far you just end up building a momentum and going as far as you can until somebody can stop you, or until you just run out of steam and then fall down where you're at. The United States, I think, is an example of that latter thing, where it's just went on as far as it could, and without really any kind of design or plan. And then once it has gone, maybe it hasn't gone as far as it's going to be able to, but once it had consumed, the continent, well, now it's just hollowed out and consumed from within by, parasitic hierarchies that create their own place within it. Every rich person in the United States is rich by the sufferance of the government that, produces all the money. There's a libertarian fantasy of the self-made person, but, why are oil billionaires oil billionaires? Because the government said, well, let's build these roads and let you have cars and make the consumption of oil, we have virtue rather than wasteful excess. And then there's a recursion there where those people can then hollow out the state and seize control of it through this backward method of whatever, lobbyists or, sending their own Congress people. But everybody, I have lawyer people in my life. They have a libertarian history. You're not wealthy because you're a lawyer. The law is mandated by the government. The courts exist because of the state. You haven't accomplished personally much of. And this is a tough place to walk, because people do accomplish things, and you never want to come out at someone and say, well, your accomplishments are meaningless. It's not that your accomplishments are meaningless. It's that your accomplishments are dependent upon everybody else's accomplishments, and that's the context within them. Now, if you maybe are at the peak of it and understand it well, maybe what you can do is try to shame people into not being you and making them feel like they're correct to regret their decisions, and that what they studied in college was wrong, or that who they are is incorrect and bad. Because you've seized what is supposedly theirs, a place in society, and made it, controlled it so thoroughly that they are refugees from the type of life that their parents had for them, right? Their parents trying to colonize the future. But back to the idea of excess and restraint. The poor, the powerless person can't have restraint. They're coerced into the single action that they pursue. Whether or not you can look at that action as justified, their tendency is to do it because that's all that they can see as an option. Now, you might see other options, but presumably they do not. Presumably that they feel backed into a corner so badly that this is the only choice they have. Now, you see the person in power doing terrible things, and the sense is, well, these are people who are doing this because no one is willing to stop them, and they don't have a moderating influence to make them stop on their own. And I think that there's reinforcing feedbacks of depersonalization, of othering, and so on, where in terms of military and aggression, there's in terms of military aggression, you've eliminated the conscience. You've created a situation where people will just do any unspeakable thing because they feel justified in it by, I don't know, video games or whatever. They're training that makes it seem as if the other people aren't really people and should be exterminated. And it's an ongoing thing, but you hope that in the purpose of a well-conceived and effortful spiritual life is to not do these things, to understand that other people should and can exist, and that's fine, and you should try to moderate your behavior toward them. You can get into this if you transgress in terms of your popularity and celebrity, and eventually you might become the president. You can do this in terms of, well, a lot of things. If you can't moderate your own behavior, eventually you're going to come to the limit of what that behavior can get you. And then, your sprawled out form is going to be consumed by whatever you left behind. If you just fuck your way through every encounter, if you just are out there trying to get it done all the time, if you can't moderate your desire for sex, for example, what are you going to have? You're going to have probably some VD and some unwanted children, a lot of broken-hearted people who will be antagonistic toward you. If you can't, moderate your eating and your consumption, you're going to demand that a lot of people have difficult lives that are suited to satisfying your material desires, and you're going to have, a polluted and compromised world that is just hollowed out. This hollowing out of everything to satisfy unmoderated desire is really, it seems like it's the consequence of all unmoderate, like any conceivable ones. We'll go through the different sins, gluttony, eventually, whatever, the diabetes will get you, or you'll descend into madness. If you excessive lust, you'll become syphilitic and go be horrified. If it's just money or wrath or all the different transgressive behaviors, you have to moderate them because either people are powerless to stop you, or they're willing to go along with you because you're in a position of authority and you attain that authority by doing the transgression. So always the argument is against hierarchy. That's continuously going to be my position. But how is the hierarchy opposed, and what is its nature? It does seem to me as if all hierarchies are built on this transgressive excess, on this wickedness I'll say wicked. It's better to say that than evil. Evil is watered down and meaningless to me. Wickedness does sound like real. You could see someone as being wicked. If you told me that somebody was evil, it sounds like a joke. So they're wicked. Then it means like, well, what did they do? It calls into question. If you say somebody's evil, it does seem like a character quality, rather than a descriptor, right? It becomes it's elemental, like to their person. Whereas wickedness seems like an acquired trait. Not to say that anybody is evil, it's just that that's what the term has come to reference. So, if the domination of other people inevitably comes around through an excess of, an unmitigated excess of iniquitous behavior, right? I'm so angry and violent that I kill so many people that everyone has to follow me. And now I'm a despotic king. Or I'm so greedy that I eventually accumulate all the money and can control people and make them regret their life choices. And, now I'm the plutocrat. Or, I'm so eager for approval and needy for validation that I seek fame and glory and eventually become the president. All of these bad behaviors, when unmoderated, lead to a different hierarchy. And so what does that mean? It means that every hierarchy is rooted in sin fundamentally, because it's the ultimate force that is driving your position to your desire to dominate others comes from unmoderated iniquity within you. So, that's the balm that religion ideally would provide, which is to argue against, unmoderated bad behavior. Contemporary religion tends to reinforce the position of the authoritarian system to justify its existence post facto. And it becomes too worldly and it becomes too temporal and physical and real, and it loses all of its potency, because it just exists as a cheering section for the domination of others. It just becomes a physical trapping of what is, rather than a uniting force of what could be and a spiritual concept of a better world. It just becomes a validation for the existence of the current world. And as soon as, the religionist shrugs their shoulders like, well, that's how it is, because you've stopped having a religion and are really just, it's a political ideology. It's not grasping for some concept of a unifying, internally developed quintessence, something that is transcendent of material reality and which is generated from the mind and through language and interaction with other people. It stops being that development of a flourishing of that community and just becomes a repressive instrument of the state. And that, I think, is not the crisis, because it creates a flourishing of contemporary religion, but that is the system of a lot of contemporary religion, at least where I'm at. I see this a lot, where it's justifying the existence of terrible, terrible practices by blaming people who are in a bad situation, by creating this scenario that you say it's because of your bad choices, because you didn't study the right thing in college. It's always this blaming you for your own victimization. without, and that's again divisive, isolating. You can't militate against injustice if you're alone and feel like you're uniquely uniquely penalized, that your personal penalty in the story of your life could be different if you had not done this thing, or if you'd done this thing. If that's your situation, right? If you're into that world where regret is reinforced, the religion reinforces that, then the religion doesn't offer any kind of liberation. It doesn't free you from material reality. It blames you for your material reality. And that's, well, then it's completely missed the point. It's not helping you at all. Except that, you can build that community of people who are particularly opposed to any other people. And this, I guess, is why I stopped having religion initially. Was, you go to church and they're always saying, well, these bad people have these problems because they're this way. And eventually I noticed that they were talking about me. The case, these wicked sinners have this and that quality that I have. Right down to like the right or wrong ethnicity, or the right or wrong emotions or attractions. All of these things where you're justifying somebody's penury or incarceration, or their superfluity to society that pushes them into the periphery. They're unpersoned, and it's their fault for having these incorrect qualities. Well, then it's just a doctrinaire political system that exists to reinforce that hierarchy and to do harm to people. And that's, as soon as the religion is doing harm to people, well, then it's lost its purpose, right? Its intention should be to help people to transcend their material state and to attain a connection to the sublime via a method that incorporates the efforts of others. Again, I think that if there's a God, it will be created out of language, out of a mutual concept shared by people. If there's a soul, it's created out of language. Language requires other people. It's this communion of other people and our thoughts together that generates a spiritual entity, I guess. Entities may be improper because it's ephemeral by its nature. It can't really exist. It exists outside of reality, and that's why it's perfect, right? Nothing real can be perfect. Only what you can imagine. You can only imagine perfect things. So the perfect thing is something that we all imagine and that liberates all of us simultaneously. That's, in my opinion, that's what we should demand from a God. And if we're going to have one, it should reign equal. It should grant us all our wishes. So to develop a spirit, well, we have shared experiences and this mutual feeling where we invest with emotional weight and force mundane things we see in reality, and then that become then immaterial and sublime. So every day I see the big dog and the little dog together, and the little big becomes a concept that has or attains a meaning, not just to me, but to others around me who share this experience. And then we create, a spirit. It's the local God. It's our thing that we have together, a little shibboleth that we speak to one another that reinforces our bonds, but also that stops existing in reality but then only exists in linguistically, and thus potentially perfectly. It's just a matter of getting all of people to find that thing that we can, I guess, bind ourselves together linguistically through. That becomes, well, there's definitely more to it, of course, but if that is my intention here, is creating well, it's in assisting in a search for that, and to try to attain and to try to just reach out into the darkness to strangers and say, can you want to help me with this? You want to do this too? It'd be nice if we could. I have stupid Windows background. I should have turned it off. But I have the robin in the snow, my crest and symbol. It means a lot to me and a few other people who know me. Why can't it be unifying? Why can't it be symbolic of the larger community, of where I live? To me, it means a lot because of where I live, and I think it should to other people who live here. But their experiences are different, and you can't fault people for obviously you can't fault people for having different experiences unless you're in charge of the hierarchy, in which case you can blame them for not studying the right thing or going to the right school or whatever, because it's their fault they have less. The idea is that we're trying to not necessarily colonize, but to find a place that cannot be colonized or controlled, right? When the religion fails to do that, when the religion fails spiritually because it tries to colonize the mind or the spirits of all of us by through domination and hierarchy, you see it falls apart because it's constantly creating adversaries. It creates the seeds of its own failure. So the true religion or the true faith is going to have to be, by its nature, universal. And when the religion that isn't starts to fail, well, then it comes back into, it has to find its own place, and its place in the material world is to reinforce the existing hierarchy. So all of this is to say, I really hope that the people of Gaza aren't exterminated, and it's really horrible that they might be. It's almost, maybe this seems, it's probably incorrect for me to say this, but it almost seems like there's a comorbidity between ethnicities and people and with the natural world, with all of the extinctions, and that the monoculture will prevail and is prevailing, and yet it's the adversary, right? Because eventually the monoculture will come for you, and I hope that you can build against that, because the monoculture does seem to be based on transgression of goodness and elimination of correct behavior in favor of transgressive bad behavior. All of this is to say that you could do better and should do better, and that it is your place to stand up and tell people stop being an asshole. Don't do bad things. Do good things. Don't do bad things. Because they'll transgress because they can't help themselves. So consider it a service that you're offering to these people, to tell them not to. Maybe they have no conscience, but you can still try to shock their conscience. Maybe it's the instrument of conscience forming. I think we can all. I think of the transgressive things that I have done, and I remember individual times where I hurt somebody's feelings, and I knew it. And those things, I still feel intense shame about them. And these are things that happened long ago that aren't even in retrospect, bad things. But somebody was hurt, and I do feel bad about it still. And so I try not to do those things. I avoid misbehavior because of how it hurt other people in a way that was jarring to me personally and shaming. You're better than this. And I guess constantly trying to remind people that they're better than the worst thing that they're doing, or they're better than the terrible shit they're up to right now, is try to do that. That's what I'll do. I guess I'm going to go downtown and march tonight, or at least be among the people, say, don't do genocide. We don't like it. Don't do genocide.